Welcome to the Catholic Culture Podcast, dedicated to the Holy Family. I'm Thomas V. Miras. Today I'm talking to Chris Baker of the indie rock band the Duskwhales about their new EP, Hospital Dreams. Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Wanted to apologize, first of all, for missing an episode last week. I was just a bit under the weather, so I decided it would be better to take the week off rather than have a scratchy voice. I've got a nice interview today with a member of one of my favorite bands, the Duskwhales. Some of you may remember that I interviewed them last year for Catholic Culture. This is before the podcast started. Chris and I are going to talk about the Duskwhales' new EP, Hospital Dreams, which was largely inspired by his fight with cancer. It's actually a pretty short interview this week, so I'm going to take the opportunity first to tell you about a couple other things I wanted to tell you about. If you want to skip straight to the interview, you can always go to the show notes page and look at the timestamps. That would be at www.catholicculture.org/episode 5. The first thing I wanted to talk about here was I went to the Heavenly Bodies exhibit at the Met in New York, which many people will have heard of in connection with the somewhat scandalous Met Gala. You know, you probably saw a picture of Rihanna dressed as the Pope or something like that at least. So this exhibit basically consists of a set of papal garments, vestments, tiaras, mitres, things like that, lent by the Vatican, and then some pieces of modern fashion that were sort of inspired, if you could use that word, by Catholicism one way or another. Now, based on what I saw, I don't think the Vatican should have been involved in this at all, but the smartest thing they did was require that the real papal vestments be displayed in a separate setting from the modern pieces, because the modern section was just pretty much a disaster. Aesthetically, religiously, I would say deeply stupid at best. A couple of the modern pieces I did like, and I'll tell you about those in a minute. So, of course, there were a couple of pieces that were written about that were overtly blasphemous and offensive. I'm not going to bother to talk about those here because they've already been commented on sufficiently, I think. But, you know, one of the odd things about this show is that there were a lot of pieces that just looked sort of normal, like they were dresses that were obviously inspired by nuns' habits or things like that. And, you know, you can debate whether you should be wearing a dress that looks like a habit if you're not a nun. But, you know, just as artworks, they're not problematic in themselves. But anyway, the odd thing is that a lot of these pieces, some of which looked relatively innocuous, just to look at them, I wouldn't have known that they were intended to be subversive in some way if I hadn't read the plaques, which is interesting. So, for example, there was one of these dresses that was sort of inspired by the design of a habit. And the description on the plaque says, "This habit," in quotes, by Riccardo Tisci, consists of a long skirt that wraps over the head to shroud the entire body in a swathe of silk jersey. Its propriety, however, is both tenuous and temporary, as a flip of the wrist and a toss of the head brings the veil tumbling down in a gesture suggestive of striptease. It's like, okay, I wouldn't have been able to tell that from looking at the thing, but thanks for letting me know what your intentions were with that. And it's just weird because a lot of the pieces were like that. There were a lot of pieces that were just kind of, okay, it's a dress that sort of looks like a cassock or a nun's outfit. A lot of them were obviously intended to, with the cassock ones, were intended to sort of like flip gender roles or something sort of facile and dumb like that. But it was odd, and I would say, you know, a good 30% of the pieces at least would fit this description, that they weren't overtly offensive looking, but if you read the plaque, it's like, oh, this is gross. Aside from the pieces that were actually offensive, I found the level of supposed engagement and inspiration from Catholic imagery to be quite superficial. I mean, a lot of it was just like, oh, a ton of them were just, okay, these outfits are inspired by clerical or religious garb. Okay, whoop-de-doo. And then some of the others were just, okay, we're going to take this dress and slap a picture of Mary on it, which is like, it's like the fashion equivalent of Christian rock, except that it's, in this case, it's often intended to be subversive and mess with the sacred. But I make the comparison to Christian rock insofar as a lot of it is is really surface level. Like, so, okay, we're singing this song about Jesus, and it's very explicit and on the nose, but it doesn't run that deep. And that was the case with a lot of these things. You know, it was touted that a lot of the designers had Catholic upbringing or some kind of relationship to Catholicism in their background, even if many of them were not practicing Catholics. First of all, we need to stop pretending, or the art world, or let's say the Catholics who want to seem relevant to the art world, need to stop deluding themselves into thinking that there's something valuable intrinsically in engaging with Catholic imagery or ideas. It's how you engage and the depth of the engagement that matters. And this is equally true in the high art world as it is in, you know, the criticisms that you would make of, you know, the Christian film industry or Christian rock or whatever. Actually, some of the pieces that I liked included some of the Byzantine-inspired pieces, and the reason for that is in part because the most of the Western pieces were mimicking or mocking clerical or nun's garb in some way, whereas the Byzantine pieces took their inspiration more from iconography, and they didn't just sort of slap a sacred image on a dress. It was a lot more. There was a lot, you know, more substantial engagement with the Byzantine aesthetic, and so some of those pieces I thought worked pretty well, and I could imagine some rich lady in Constantinople 1,000 years ago wearing this dress. Another thing that struck me about this show, and this goes back to the plaques again, and this is also typical of the art world in general, where you have to read the plaque to get the point, then it's bad art. You know, but so many of these people are so highly conceptual that you have to read the plaque to get what they were going for. And it's like, okay, you failed already. To go back to the theme of superficial engagement here, they would make the comparisons in the descriptions of these pieces, make comparisons between the fashion world and Catholicism that were just so shallow and like so tenuous that it made me laugh. Hold on, I'm gonna read this one to you. Okay, so this was a Byzantine-inspired cross pendant from the personal collection of Gabrielle Chanel, and that at the end of the plaque it says, "Just as pendant crosses were one of the most persistent forms of jewelry in Byzantium, serving as a marker of the wearer's faith, Chanel's versions were highly sought after by her clients, worn as a sign of loyalty to her particular brand of modernism." It's like, okay, dude, you're really stretching there, whoever wrote this. Yeah, you wear things to signify things. I guess that's a connection. It says just as they wore these crosses in Byzantium to mark their faith, Chanel's versions were worn as a sign of loyalty to her particular brand of modernism. But it should be, you know, as opposed to that, because it's the complete opposite. It's you know, the two couldn't be more different. To wear a cross as a sign of loyalty to some dumb designer's brand of modernism versus as a sign of belief that Christ died to save you from your sins. There's another one that kind of made me laugh here. Such an expression of the highly specialized skills of the haute couture is a reminder that fashion, not unlike the Roman Catholic Church, is defined by a system governed by hierarchy. It's like, dude, what isn't defined by a system governed by hierarchy in human existence? It's just such a stupid comparison. It doesn't tell us anything. It's just a comparison so you can find something to compare to, but it doesn't enlighten us in any way. It doesn't really provoke any kind of thought. In terms of, you know, and as far as some of the more provocative pieces in this, you know, display, you know, one justification I can see someone making for it would be, oh, it's thought-provoking at least. Well, no, not really. I saw my fellow attendees, I heard tittering from some of them, but I didn't hear any deep thoughts being expressed by, you know, the sexy nun habit. And the engagement, as I'm saying, was very superficial. It was like on the level of a Halloween party, not on the level of great art. My favorite piece in the modern section, and I'll put a photo of this on the show notes page for today's episode, was a wedding dress. And part of the reason that I liked it, aside that I found it aesthetically pleasing, was that it wasn't one of these where you're just like engaging in a very explicit and superficial way with the Christian imagery. You can tell it is sort of inspired aesthetically by certain designs on vestments and things like that. But it's something that you could actually wear as a wedding dress, and it wouldn't be sort of like this silly dress that looks sort of like a nun's dress that, you know, who's going to wear that? But this could actually be worn as a wedding dress, and it would not be at all out of place. It's quite beautiful. Oh, that was by Christian Lacroix. So yeah, again, I'll put a photo of that on the show notes page. By the way, so one of my roommates works at the Sheen Center, which is run by the Archdiocese of New York, and they had an event that was sort of a Q&A with the curator of the exhibit and Father James Martin, of course. And I didn't make it to this, but my roommate did, and he told me that they were asked in a general sort of way about some of the potentially offensive items in the exhibit, and that their response was something like, oh, well, we knew from the beginning that some people were going to be offended no matter what we did, so we decided not to sort of make an overt effort not to be offensive, or something like that. And it just struck me that, yeah, they're sort of lightly considering whether people might be offended, and, well, people are going to be offended no matter what, so let's just do what we're going to do anyway. But the question doesn't seem to enter their minds whether God might be offended by some of these things. And, when you've got a bondage mask covered in rosaries in your exhibit, and you're going to pretend that this is like some kind of deep and respectful engagement with the mysteries of the faith and the Catholic artistic tradition, you're just full of it. I will say, though, again, it was great that the Vatican had the real Vatican treasures displayed separately from the modern stuff, because I would say it's worth going to see the real papal garments and things like that. It mostly is 19th and 20th century stuff. I think the earliest pope that they have things related to there is maybe Pope Pius VII. I think he was 19th century. But there's a lot of stuff from Blessed Pius IX. There's a lot from Leo XIII in particular. There are a lot of items that were given to him, made for him by various religious communities for the occasion of his 50th anniversary as a priest. A lot of those pieces were quite beautiful, and they had Pope John Paul II's red shoes and some other items that he wore. Quite a number of these things were relics. Things associated with St. John the 23rd, Blessed Paul VI, and things like that. And those are all quite worth seeing. I was struck in particular by a chasuble of Pius XI that was made for him by the Franciscans, a Franciscan community, on the 700th anniversary of the Franciscans. And it was covered in scenes of various Franciscan saints and missionaries. And the detail was just incredible. It was stuff that, like, who's going to be standing this close to the Pope, gawking at every detail of this chasuble, and just the gratuitousness in it, maybe in a good way, and the extravagance of it was really striking, because it's one of those things. It's like, who's going to see it? Well, the Pope's going to see it, and God's going to see it, so that's good enough. All right, enough about the Met. I want to tell you about a couple of movies I watched in the past couple of weeks. The first is one you have to see. It's called Babette's Feast. You may have heard of it. It's on the Vatican's 40 great films list that I think came out in the 90s. This movie came out in 1987. It's a Danish film based on a short story. And basically it deals with these two elderly sisters in a small Puritan community in Denmark, and how their lives are changed by this French cook who comes to work for them, who brings this very French and Catholic sensibility. It's a really funny and beautiful and moving film, and very Eucharistic. You've got this feast that brings a greater level of life and love to these Protestants, basically, and they're really freaked out by the extravagance of it, but they are eventually sort of seduced by this feast that the French cook makes. And there is a beautiful message of sort of, it's never too late, no matter how much time you've wasted and what mistakes you've made, what missteps you've taken in your life, that God gives you what you always dreamed of having, even things that we've rejected often, and we think that it's too late, that we missed our chance, that we threw it away when we had it. God gives it back to us in unexpected ways, and there's a lot of beauty in that. And particularly, there's something that's aimed explicitly to artists in that respect, which I found personally very inspiring and consoling, as I'm pretty young, but as someone who feels like I've wasted some time in not pursuing my vocation as I wanted to. There's this line in the film, "In heaven you will be the great artist that God intended you to be." It's true, because in heaven we're going to be completely in beauty and communicating in beauty all the time, and that's all we're going to be doing. Even if you've missed your chance to have maybe the career that God was going to give you through your own negligence or whatever, that's not so important as staying in the moment, not spending too much time regretting the past, making sure you get to heaven and get as many other people to heaven as possible, because even things that are lost in this life will be regained as long as you can just get into heaven. that is the important thing, because you're going to have an eternity to spend in beauty in heaven. That means that even the artistic things and the beauty that we bring forth in this life, really the importance of it is helping to get people into heaven and to achieve our own salvation through our work. Because once you're in, and that's it. You've got all the time in the world and more to enjoy and produce things of beauty and spend eternity with beauty itself. So I highly recommend that movie. It's just awesome and worth watching multiple times. I've already watched it twice in the couple of weeks since I first saw it. Other movie I wanted to talk about, not quite as deep as Babette's Feast, but really good, really good entertainment. With some substance to it. That is a movie that I think it's still in theaters. I'm not entirely sure, but it came out recently. It's called A Quiet Place, directed by and starring John Krasinski, who is best known as Jim from The Office, and he turns out to be a really good dramatic actor. So the concept of this movie is basically a monster movie. Basically, these creatures have invaded Earth and wiped out most of the population, and it's been figured out that they don't see, they have highly sensitive ears, and they detect people via sound. So it's this family that lives on a farm, and they live in total silence, which is a really cool idea for a movie because it means that there's very little speaking. So the story has to be told visually and in other ways. By the way, I'm going to share something very embarrassing about myself, and this happens to me every once in a while, where I see a movie and somehow I miss an incredibly obvious plot point. And in this case, I'll just say, for those who see the movie or have seen it, and this isn't really a spoiler at all, that the girl in the movie is deaf. I watched the entire movie without figuring that out. I mean, it couldn't be more obvious. She wears a hearing aid, and whenever the film cuts to her perspective, it literally, the sound design changes and it's silence. I remember at the very beginning of the movie, I was like, the sound design in this movie is kind of inconsistent. But that's just how dumb I am. And I can only hope that you'll find it endearing, instead of being like, why would I listen to anything this guy says? He's such an idiot, and turn off the podcast. Anyway, this movie was awesome, super suspenseful, really intense. There's some violence. It's actually quite a wholesome film. I don't think there's a single curse word in it. There's no sex or anything like that. There's just like scariness and violence. Good, clean violence, as they say. Yeah, there's a lot I could say, but there's a lot of beautiful heroism and stuff about family and forgiveness. And some people have mentioned, I wouldn't say pro-life in sort of an ideological sense, but there is a whole thing where they're having a baby, and they're doing what they can to protect it, even though having a baby, obviously, which is noisy, puts you in extreme vulnerability in that situation. But they're embracing life anyway. But the only other thing I wanted to mention about this film is I could not believe the review that the film critic at the New Yorker gave this film. Richard Brody wrote this review. He interprets the film as some kind of like subliminal work of white supremacy. Basically, the only reason is that the characters are all white. They're rural white characters, and they defend themselves using guns. So, of course, he's mad that it supposedly celebrates gun culture, despite the fact that they're literally protecting their children from being devoured by aliens. I have to read this line from the review. He says, "In their enforced silence, these characters are a metaphorical, silent, white majority, one that doesn't dare to speak freely for fear of being heard by the supersensitive ears of the dark others." The dark others being aliens, who, yes, they are slightly darker than the human characters. That tends to be typical of aliens in monster movies. I don't think it really is some symbolism of black people or something like that. But it's so over the top, this review, and it's embarrassing for someone who considers himself a serious film critic to have written this. And it fascinates me that he gave this crazy interpretation of the film, given that there's no chance that he really believes that this symbolism is present in the film. I just don't believe that he really thinks that. So, because it's so obvious, he's obviously not an idiot in the sense of having a low IQ. He may be an idiot in many other ways, but it's fascinating. And I wonder, why is he just bored with his job and he felt like savaging a good movie because he makes him feel powerful? Is he mad that it's a life-affirming, family-affirming film that's really successful and at a high level artistically? I don't know, but it's very bizarre and sad that this hack wrote this review. All right, now it is time for my interview with Chris Baker from the Duskwhales. As I mentioned, I interviewed them before last year, and I'll link to that older interview with the full band, the trio, in the show notes page for today. That's catholicculture.org/episode 5. I'm not going to spend time describing the Duskwhales style here because I'm actually going to play one of the tracks from their new EP before this interview starts and another one at the end of it. I'll just say I've known them for a long time, pretty much the entirety of their existence as a band. They're an awesome band. They're great guys. They're all Catholic. And this EP is somewhat unique among their output in that usually they're very collaborative, but this was written entirely by Chris Baker, who plays drums and sings. And a lot of the songs were written or worked on while he was in the hospital being treated for cancer. Don't worry, he's better now. He's in remission. So I'm just going to play you the title track from the EP, Hospital Dreams, and then I will play you the interview.
Sitting stately in the Pentagon, waiting for my vitals to return. I am taking patience for a spin again, hoping to remain another hour. Oh well, I lost another batch of cells. Oh well, I fought another battle. I am dripping slowly from a plastic bag, waiting to absorb another poison. I am taking liquids to relieve myself, hoping to retain a second cycle. Oh well, I lost another night of sleep. Oh well, I found another needle. I am growing backwards in the mirror again, waiting to receive another symptom. I am pulling levers to reveal myself, hoping for a chance to get on TV. Oh well, I lost another patch of hair. Oh well, I lost another tangle. I am ringing slightly in my ears all day, hearing every scream and high-pitched whisper. I am wearing headphones to replace myself, hoping to erase another sister. Oh well, I lost another frequency. Oh well, I gained another vital. I am singing softly in the hospital, trying to remain a silent patient. I am humming whispers to my phone again, hoping to forget another sorrow. Oh well, I lost another melody. Oh well, I gained a new tomorrow. Oh well, I lost another memory. Oh well, I gained a new tomorrow. Oh well, I lost another melody. Oh well, I gained a new tomorrow. Oh well, I lost another memory. Oh well, I gained a new tomorrow.
This came out at the beginning of April. Is that right?
Yeah, I think you remember correctly.
Yeah. This is it's a great EP, first of all, and kind of different from the stuff you've done before. I mean, definitely there's a lot of the same elements, but I would just say the overall sound and aesthetic, how it comes to the listener, is a little bit different. I just was hoping you could tell us the story of this EP from the very beginning.
Sure, yeah. I mean, larger context would be the story of my cancer being that, I was diagnosed with testicular cancer last October. So that was kind of a whole thing that I had to go through treatment for like about 3 months or so. And I guess, yeah, even wider context than that, the past year was just been kind of a whirlwind of events in Duskwhale history, I guess you could say. Because we had been living together, and then that kind of didn't work. And, Brian had expressed interest in kind of wanting to leave the band. So it was very
for
tumultuous.
Our listeners, I'll just say Brian is the keyboardist.
Yeah. So it was just, kind of a difficult time for us leading up to the end of the year. And then the whole cancer thing happened. So it was just like one thing after another, kind of just like we didn't know what was going on, basically. And kind of like a lot of band stuff got put on hold for obvious reasons. So yeah, the EP, I guess, was just kind of a way to get back into the swing of things, I guess you could say. And it was also kind of our first attempt at self-recording, which we had kind of been intending to work on for a while, but then everything got put on hold and everything. So yeah, it was just kind of like mostly Seth and I working in the basement for a long time, and then Brian coming in and doing his parts because, eventually he kind of decided to keep playing with us, but, that's kind of a whole separate story.
Right.
But
He's kind of sparse on the album. I mean, I think it sounds great. Like, I think it really works for what this EP was doing, but yeah.
Cool. I'm glad that works for you.
You were diagnosed with cancer, and did you write all of the material in the hospital while you were undergoing chemo?
No, see, yeah, about a lot of the music and stuff I had been kind of working on leading up to it, and then the songs sort of shaped around the stuff that was going on in my life, I guess you could say.
Right.
So, yeah, it wasn't like the first 3 tracks I hadn't intended to be in the context of this sort of cancer journey. But then when I decided to make the EP, it kind of fit in with the other tracks. But yeah, the idea for the EP I had the first night I was in the hospital. I just, had those 3 songs kind of done. And then the other ones I wrote during the treatment. And the last track, Hospital Dreams, I actually wrote in the hospital, hence the name.
There is a line in the first track that kind of seems to relate a little bit about going back home to your families from an sort of abnormal situation and having to adjust to that.
Yeah, that was definitely a prominent theme. I was trying to hit pretty hard on just the idea of kind of, feeling out of place even in your own home, and then just kind of having to readjust to all these strange things that are happening around you, and, the idea of like being in a familiar place but feeling, like you shouldn't be there almost. So yeah, it's pretty strange, but
yeah, sure. Did you find this, like, writing these songs, I'm sure it must have just been a good way to occupy your time. You had a lot of time just sitting in the hospital, I would imagine.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was kind of the primary motivator behind it, honestly. It wasn't necessarily like I felt I had to like tell my story or, provide some huge, prophetic whatever. It was mostly just, I was really kind of like going crazy and needed, with the band, it's like you always have something to occupy your time with,
right?
Especially because, I'm really busy with booking shows and managing and everything and practicing and recording. But once everything was put on hold, it was like I had this more free time that I knew what to do with. And then, when your body's kind of like doing all these crazy things, you have to just distract yourself. So yeah, it's like the only way I knew how to, basically, was just writing and recording. And then I guess also bothering people on social media, which I got pretty good at.
Yeah, I was observing this. So, yeah, I guess we should talk about the songs that relate to that experience. My favorite tracks on the album are the second track, which doesn't really relate to it, Only One in Need, the sort of very Elliott Smith sounding one, and then the last 2, Turn White and Hospital Dreams. The Hospital Dreams is just almost literally just like a catalog of things that you're experiencing in the hospital, right?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, it's exactly like you said. Just, that first night I was there, just kind of like lying in bed, hearing people screaming in the background and kind of just going a little crazy myself, super sleep deprived, and just writing this weird poem on my phone, and then just like humming this, little melody. And not thinking it was ever going to become anything really. And then
It's super catchy.
cool. I'm glad that
And I love
glad
the
that it
harmonies
turned
on the
out.
chorus.
Okay. Thanks.
I couldn't tell if that was just you doing all the harmonies or is that the other guys as well.
On that song, yeah, actually, I did all the high
Nice,
parts.
nice. Yeah, it's kind of like it feels kind of wry, just like the sound of the song, and then the attitude you take towards all these like sort of surreal.
Yeah.
It has a sort of surreal feel to it.
That's pretty accurate. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, in the other two songs that deal with this this cancer experience, you have references to Mary, and of course, your guys' last full length album was Sorrowful Mysteries. It was dedicated to Mary, Mother of Sorrows. So she shows up in much the same vein, I guess I could say.
Yeah.
So you have All Her Wonder, which I guess if I didn't know you, I wouldn't necessarily guess that it was Mary, that you referred to. But can you talk about the lyrics to that song?
Sure, yeah. With that one, it's a little bit less blatant, but it was originally meant to be sort of like a hymn to the Blessed Mother. And one thing I had mentioned before, a kind of strange thing I noticed was that you cannot spell the word chemotherapy without mother. It's sort of a strange coincidence, but yeah, it became very I don't know, meaningful to me just because like I grew very close to my mother over the past few months dealing with this because she's a nurse. And, she was such an important figure to me during this whole cancer treatment, just always knowing what to do. And, like Mary does, she takes, a lot of the weight off of people's shoulders. And yeah, it's important to, I think, for anyone to just have all these great maternal figures when you're going through something like that. So even not your own mother necessarily, just like the doctors and the nurses and anyone who can kind of help and step in and be that person that can just act as a mother, I guess you could say. So it was just supposed to reference that.
By the way, I should probably mention, in case people are worrying, Chris is in remission. So
Yeah.
it had a happy ending. Yeah, and thank God for that. So then you've got Turn White, which is definitely the most like heavy, and I don't mean heavy like metal or like I don't know. I don't mean sonically heavy. It just like tonally heavy and somber. And the repeating thing is what kind of mother would let her son die? That comes over and over throughout the song, and then at the end it says the kind of mother that would watch her son rise. I could see that being kind of like, I don't know, on the nose or corny in another context, but it works really powerfully in this, especially because you leave it to the end, basically. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, I thought it would be good to answer the question in that case. Like sometimes it's better to be ambiguous, but I think it worked better, so I'm glad that it wasn't corny.
Right, no, not at all. How did you end up recording this? Did you guys record this in your basement? Is that right?
Yeah, it was just like I said, mostly just Seth and I kind of chugging away at it. Long hours in the basement, just tampering with Logic, which we were kind of still figuring out. It was mostly just us trying to decide if we could pull off a self-recording thing. And yeah, it was just a lot of experimentation. And luckily, acoustic guitar was not too hard to nail, which is kind of the foundation for a lot of the tracks. And we were more concerned about getting a good drum tone, so luckily it was like pretty sparse. So I mean, for the songs, I think it worked out pretty well because they're kind of bare bones.
Yeah.
If we did some more like traditional Duskwhale, like really elaborate arrangements and stuff, I don't know. We'll see how it goes for future recordings because we're still kind of planning to do some more full length, heavier recordings. But yeah, for this, I think it worked out pretty well. It was just a lot of experimentation and kind of having to deal with the limitations and just not worrying too much about quality, I guess.
Well, not
you kind of have to let go.
But yeah, it's like
production. High quality.
Yeah. So was it more stripped down because you were going to be doing this, recording it this way, or did it just sort of work out that way?
I would say, yeah, it kind of just worked out that way.
Cool.
Yeah, the songs didn't lend themselves to really big arrangements, so yeah, it was kind of just like I figured we needed to try out recording, and this was a good way to see if we could do it. So it was hitting two birds with one stone, I guess.
So you've been talking about this concept that you guys have that you're working on, which is to record each of, I think you mentioned this on the interview I did last year, which is about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, I think, where you said because your last album had taken so long to record, you guys already had like a few albums worth of music written, and that you were going to do a trilogy of albums where each one of you, the Duskwhales is a trio for people who aren't familiar with them, where each one of you solely provided the material for each album respectively. So is this the first one, or is this, are you going to do a full length that's just you, or is this yours for that trio, that trilogy?
No, yeah, this was just a one-off. It wasn't part of the, I guess, grand scheme of our trilogy. It was more of just a test to see if we could pull off the self-recording. I mean, we had that idea a long time ago, and then we kind of it took longer than we thought, and we have just kind of been sitting on, we still have all these other songs that we've been meaning to do, and there's a whole other set of reasons why we haven't necessarily completed them all yet, but
got it.
Yeah, we're still planning to finish that hopefully by the end of the summer, and just three new albums.
Finish all three new albums by the end of this summer?
Or at least scratch the surface, yeah.
Right.
I mean, we were able to do the EP in only like a few weeks, so
cool.
But yeah, it's just a matter of syncing our schedules basically. And
so Brian sort of left, and then he sort of left when you guys were on your hiatus, and then he came back. So is he basically just back in it now?
Pretty much, yeah. It was a weird set of months where we didn't really know what was going on, and then the cancer thing happened, and that kind of just like turned everything on its head if it wasn't already. So
right.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak exactly for Brian, but I knew that he felt he had to kind of figure out what was going on in his own life for a while, and then kind of realized he wanted to keep playing with the band. So it's almost like nothing really changed. But at the same time, yeah, we, I guess, have to figure out what we each want from the band and kind of put that into our albums and make it worth our while. I don't know if that makes any sense.
So how long has the band been together now?
Going on about 8 years. So yeah, we've been doing this for a while. So
who did the cover for this EP? It's really cool looking.
Thanks. Yeah, I actually just kind of put two separate images together. I originally had the idea of making like a sort of weird collage of things that I'd sort of just been collected and given to throughout the chemotherapy of just, some like medical items and random like Star Wars things that I was gonna put into like a weird sort of I Spy thing. But I tried doing it and it just like looked terrible. And also there's probably some copyright issues with putting Star Wars on there I'm thinking about now. But yeah, I anyways decided to just go more minimalist and just found this like piece of cardboard that had some like splatter paint on it and held it up against the walls of my room, which are painted red, and kind of just cropped it into like a little, I don't know, David Lynchian sort of square figure.
Yeah,
so
it's cool. I thought the bottom half might be like, it looked like it was a floor of some kind. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then like it could have been like part of a tiled floor or a linoleum or something, or like a galaxy of some kind.
Yeah, it's a nod to Star Wars in that sense. I like the idea of it being like a sky, but it's on the bottom, so it's like, yeah, you don't know what you're looking at exactly.
How many times did you watch the Star Wars movies when you were in the hospital?
0 times, actually. Yeah, there was... Well, the thing is that you can't watch the new one in the hospital, which was my whole spiel at the time. But yeah, it was just a lot of tweeting mostly, and a lot of eating.
Cool.
Pudding.
Chris was trying to get Disney, which still sounds weird to say out loud, to stream the new Star Wars to sick kids in hospitals. So there was this whole like Twitter campaign. It's like snowballed sort of, and then sort of just stopped, I guess.
Yeah, there's only so far you can go petitioning Disney, but got like 120,000 signatures. Pretty good, I guess.
Yeah, and you got tweeted at by Mark Hamill, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
What do you guys have coming up in the sort of immediate future?
Yeah, our focus now, I think, is just finishing those 3 albums, which we had, like I said, just been sitting on for a long time. It's mostly just been difficult, for me, just kind of having all this free time, but not being able to record everything because we want to do it all together, especially, because Brian's still working, and like I said, just syncing up all of our schedules. But yeah, we hope to at least get a good chunk of that recording done by the end of the summer, and then just gigging a lot on the weekends still, trying to save up money. Probably not doing much touring until we finish the recording. But
do you and Seth have day jobs, or?
Seth recently got a job at like a coffee shop, but right now I don't want to commit to anything since I know that most of the summer we want to spend with recording. But hopefully by the end of the summer I might transition into some more work. But yeah, it's definitely a weird limbo state that I'm in right now.
What are you listening to these days?
Good question. I've been listening to this really strange Finnish folk band called Vartina. Have you heard of them before?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because there's this song that was in the TV show Arthur. You know about Arthur?
Yes, yes.
There's this song that they had in Arthur that's kind of just been stuck in my head for since I was like a little kid. And then I like looked up this song because it's by this like Finnish folk band from the 90s, and I've just been listening to their album called Seleniko. It's like really cool. A lot of like dissonant vocal, I don't know, I guess you could say, and violins and acoustic guitars. It's pretty cool.
Was there anything in particular that you felt was major influence on the last EP?
I think the biggest ones for the EP were, like you said, Elliott Smith was huge, and also Andy Schaaf. Yeah, the original melody for Turn White I got by listening to one of his songs called Wendell Walker. So I kind of, sort of comped the chord progression and put a different melody on top of it a little bit. But yeah, he's really good and got some really great sort of laid back but really intense, somber songs. Yeah, his album The Party was like a huge influence, I would say.
All right, well, thanks for coming on, Chris. Always good talking with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Chris Baker. You can get Hospital Dreams on Bandcamp. I will link to all the Duskwhales web presence on the show notes page, catholicculture.org/episode 5. And before I wrap up this episode, I'm going to play for you the Duskwhales' Turn White from the Hospital Dreams EP.
Turn
Today's excerpt is from Urs von Balthasar. Beauty is the word which shall be our first. Beauty is the last thing which the thinking intellect dares to approach, since only it dances as an uncontained splendor around the double constellation of the true and the good, and their inseparable relation to one another. Beauty is the disinterested one, without which the ancient world refused to understand itself, a word which both imperceptibly and unmistakably has bid farewell to our new world, a world of interests, leaving it to its own avarice and sadness. No longer loved or fostered by religion, beauty is lifted from its face as a mask, and its absence exposes features on that face which threaten to become incomprehensible to man. We no longer dare to believe in beauty, and we make of it a mere appearance in order the more easily to dispose of it. Our situation today shows that beauty demands for itself at least as much courage and decision as do truth and goodness, and she will not allow herself to be separated and banned from her two sisters without taking them along with herself in an act of mysterious vengeance. We can be sure that whoever sneers at her name, as if she were the ornament of a bourgeois past, whether he admits it or not, can no longer pray, and soon will no longer be able to love. If you've listened all the way to the end of this episode, for which I thank you, please do me a favor and send me feedback at podcast@catholicculture.org. Especially for this episode, feedback would be great. It's the first one where I sort of talked off the cuff for a while at the beginning of the episode by myself. I don't know that I'll do it every episode, just when I have something to talk about and the interview isn't so long that it wouldn't make the episode ridiculously long. Another great way of giving us feedback and also just helping the show would be to give us a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. And you can find links and instructions on how to do that at the show notes page. Again, that's catholicculture.org/episode 5, the number 5, not spelled out. Getting good reviews on iTunes really helps the show to go towards the top of the search results in iTunes. Next week's episode will be an interview with Father John Maria Devaney about the history of the Dominican Order in New York City. Thanks for listening, God bless you, and I'll see you next week.